My name is Henrietta, and I'm 53 years old. I thought I had finally found happiness after years of struggle. A new husband, a stable home, a fresh start for my 9-year-old son. Everything seemed perfect until my neighbor knocked on my door one Saturday afternoon. She looked worried. She said she heard my son crying at night, but that was impossible. Dylan slept soundly through every single night. Then she said the words that changed everything. He screams stop every night. That night I pretended to sleep and waited. What I discovered shattered everything I believed about my perfect new life. Before I tell you what happened when that door opened, let me know where you are watching from today. Please tap that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this story will change how you see the people closest to you. Now, let me take you back to how it all began. Let me take you back about 15 years when I was 38 years old and living in Sacramento, California. To understand what happened with my neighbor and those screams in the night, you need to know where I came from and why I was so desperate to believe in second chances. My first marriage ended 4 years before this story begins. His name was Kevin, and when I met him in my mid-20s, I thought he was everything I ever wanted. Charming, funny, ambitious. We got married after dating for just 8 months. Everyone said we were moving too fast, but I was young and in love and convinced I knew better than anyone else. The problem started about 2 years into our marriage, right around the time I got pregnant with Dylan. Kevin lost his job at the construction company where he worked, and instead of looking for new employment, he started drinking. At first, it was just a beer or two after dinner. Then it became a six-pack. Then it became hard liquor before noon. He never hit me. I want to be clear about that. But the emotional abuse was just as devastating in its own way. He would criticize everything I did. The way I cooked, the way I cleaned, the way I dressed. Nothing was ever good enough. When Dylan was born, Kevin showed almost no interest in our son. He resented the attention I gave to the baby. He accused me of loving Dylan more than I loved him. The drinking got worse. The words got crueler. By the time Dylan was 5 years old, I knew I had to leave. Not just for myself, but for my son. Dylan was already showing signs of the damage. He was shy, withdrawn, easily startled by loud noises. He had seen too many arguments, heard too many terrible things said in anger. The divorce was ugly but mercifully quick. Kevin did not fight for custody. He did not even fight for visitation rights. He simply disappeared from our lives, moved to another state, and never looked back. I received child support checks for about 6 months before they stopped coming entirely. I did not bother to pursue it. I just wanted him gone. For the next 3 years, it was just Dylan and me against the world. I worked as an accountant at a small firm downtown. The hours were long, but the pay was decent, and my boss was understanding about my situation as a single mother. Dylan started elementary school and slowly began to come out of his shell. He made a few friends, started smiling, more stopped flinching every time someone raised their voice. I told myself I would never trust another man again. I told myself that Dylan and I were enough, that we did not need anyone else to complete our family. I believed that with every fiber of my being. And then I met Craig. It was at a church fellowship event about 2 years before the night my neighbor came to my door. I had started attending services again after years away, mostly because I wanted Dylan to have some kind of spiritual foundation. The church had a single parent support group that met on Wednesday evenings, and a friend convinced me to check it out. Craig was not part of the single parents group. He was a volunteer who helped set up chairs and serve refreshments. He was 42 years old, tall with neatly trimmed brown hair, and a smile that seemed to light up his entire face. He worked in real estate selling commercial properties throughout the Sacramento area. The first time we spoke, he asked me how I liked my coffee. Such a simple question, but the way he asked it made me feel seen, like my answer actually mattered to him. I told him I liked it with cream and 2 sugars, and he remembered that detail every single Wednesday for the next 3 months. Craig had been a widower for 5 years. His wife Sandra had died of ovarian cancer after a brutal 2-year battle. He told me about sitting by her bedside in those final weeks, holding her hand praying for a miracle that never came. He cried when he talked about her, and I found myself crying too. Here was a man who knew loss, who understood grief, who had walked through fire and come out the other side still capable of kindness. He had no children of his own. Sandra had wanted kids, but they had decided to wait until they were more financially stable. Then she got sick, and suddenly it was too late. Craig told me that one of his biggest regrets was never becoming a father. The way he said it made my heart ache for him. We started dating slowly, carefully. Craig respected my boundaries completely. He never pushed for physical intimacy before I was ready. He never complained when I cancelled plans because Dylan was sick or had a school event. He understood that my son came first, and he seemed to admire that about me, rather than resent it. After about a year of dating, I finally felt ready to introduce Craig to Dylan. I was nervous about it. Dylan had not had a positive male role model in his life, and I worried that he might reject Craig outright, or worse, become attached too quickly and get hurt. But the meeting went better than I could have hoped. Craig brought Dylan a model airplane kit, the kind you have to assemble yourself. He sat on the living room floor with my son for 2 hours, patiently helping him glue the tiny pieces together, never getting frustrated when Dylan made mistakes. By the end of that first afternoon, Dylan was laughing and showing Craig his room and asking when he could come back. Over the following months, Craig became a regular presence in our lives. He took Dylan to baseball games and taught him how to throw a proper curveball. He helped with homework on the nights I had to work late. He fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen and the squeaky hinge on the back door without being asked. Every time I looked at Craig with my son, I saw the father Dylan deserved. I saw the partner I deserved. After all those years of struggle and heartache, I finally saw a future that looked bright. When Craig proposed after a year and a half of dating, I said yes, without hesitation. We had a small wedding at the church where we met with just close friends and family. Dylan served as the ring bearer, beaming with pride as he walked down the aisle. It was the happiest day of my life. Craig moved into our house, a modest 2-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. We settled into a comfortable routine. He went to work in the mornings, I dropped Dylan at school, and in the evenings, we had dinner together as a family. Real family dinners with conversation and laughter, something Dylan and I had never experienced when Kevin was around. The neighbors commented on how happy we all seemed. Dorothy, the elderly widow who lived next door, often waved to us from her garden and remarked on what a beautiful family we made. I felt like I had finally gotten the life I always wanted. Those first 6 months were everything I had dreamed they would be. Craig was attentive, helpful, loving. He made breakfast on Saturday mornings. He helped Dylan practice for his spelling tests. He surprised me with flowers for no reason at all. I had no idea that beneath that perfect surface something dark was lurking. Something that would take everything I believed about my judgment, my instincts, and my ability to protect my own child and shatter it into a million pieces. The changes in Dylan started so gradually that I almost did not notice them at first. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed, all the red flags I explained away, because I wanted so desperately to believe that everything was fine. It was around the 7th month after the wedding when Dylan's teacher called me at work. Mrs. Patterson had been Dylan's teacher for the entire school year, and she had always given me glowing reports about his progress. So when I saw the school's number on my phone during lunch, my stomach immediately tightened with worry. Dylan has been falling asleep in class, she told me. His grades have slipped a little over the past few weeks. Is everything okay at home? I assured her that everything was fine. Better than fine, actually. We had just gotten married, I explained. Maybe Dylan was adjusting to having a stepfather in the house. Mrs. Patterson seemed satisfied with that explanation, and I pushed the concern to the back of my mind. But I started watching Dylan more closely after that call. And once I started paying attention, I noticed things I had somehow missed before. He was eating less at dinner. Not dramatically less, but enough that I noticed food left on his plate when he used to clean it entirely. His face looked a little paler than usual. There were faint shadows under his eyes that had not been there before. When I asked him if something was wrong, he always gave me the same answer. I am fine, Mom. Nothing is wrong. I noticed other changes too. Dylan used to be excited when Craig came home from work. He would run to the door and ask Craig about his day, show him drawings he had made at school, beg him to play catch in the backyard before dinner. But somewhere along the way, that enthusiasm had faded. Now, when Craig's car pulled into the driveway, Dylan would quietly excuse himself and go to his room. He said he had homework to do, or he was tired, or he just wanted some alone time. At 9 years old, I figured he was entering that phase where kids start wanting more independence. Boys his age often pull away a little. Craig said the same thing when I mentioned it to him. Boys need their space, Craig told me one evening. Do not worry so much. He's just growing up. I wanted to believe that. So I did. One night, I woke up around 2 in the morning because I was thirsty. The house was dark and quiet, and when I reached over to Craig's side of the bed, I found it empty. The sheets were cool to the touch, like he had been gone for a while. I got up and made my way downstairs, expecting to find him in the kitchen getting a glass of water, or maybe watching television in the living room. Instead, I found him sitting in the dark in the family room, just staring at nothing. No TV, no phone, no book, just sitting there in the shadows. Craig, I said, startled. What are you doing? He turned around quickly, and for just a moment I saw something flash across his face. Surprise maybe, or something else I could not quite identify. Then his expression smoothed into his usual pleasant smile. Oh, I could not sleep, he said, just thinking about a difficult deal at work. Did I wake you? No, I said. I just came down for water. He got up and walked with me to the kitchen, his arm around my shoulders. He was warm and solid and reassuring, and by the time we got back to bed, I had convinced myself that there was nothing strange about finding my husband sitting alone in the dark at 2 in the morning. But it happened again, and again. Over the next several weeks, I woke up multiple times to find Craig's side of the bed empty. Sometimes I would find him downstairs. Sometimes he would come back to bed before I fully woke up. When I suggested he see a doctor about his insomnia, he brushed off my concern. It happens sometimes, he said. It is nothing to worry about. Around the same time, I noticed something else. Dylan had started locking his bedroom door at night. This was new. He had never done that before, not even during the worst times with Kevin. When I asked him about it, he would not meet my eyes. I just like having privacy, Mom, he said. I'm not a little kid anymore. I decided to respect his wishes. He was right that he was growing up, and every parenting book I had ever read said that children need to develop autonomy. So I let it go. Then one morning, I found Dylan's bedroom key sitting on the kitchen counter. Craig noticed me looking at it. Oh, I found that on the floor in the hallway, he said, casually. Must have fallen out of his pocket. Dylan was sitting at the breakfast table eating his cereal, or rather, pushing it around his bowl without really eating. When he saw the key in my hand, something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe. But it was gone so fast I thought I imagined it. I put the key back in Dylan's room, but after that I noticed he never locked his door again. I assumed he had just lost interest in the whole privacy thing. Kids are fickle that way. Looking back, I realize now what really happened. Craig took that key on purpose. He made sure Dylan could not lock him out anymore. And my son was too scared to tell me. There was one more thing I should have questioned, but did not. Craig had developed a habit of making Dylan a cup of herbal tea before bed. He said it was chamomile good for helping children relax and sleep deeply. It is something my grandmother used to do for me, Craig explained. It helps him wind down after a busy day. I thought it was sweet, thoughtful even. Dylan always drank the tea without complaint and went to bed shortly after. He slept so soundly that when I checked on him before I went to sleep, he barely stirred at all. I should have wondered why a child who used to toss and turn all night suddenly slept like he was drugged. Because that is exactly what was happening. The knock on my door came on a Saturday afternoon in late October. Craig had left that morning for what he said was an overnight business trip. A client in San Francisco wanted to see some properties, and Craig would not be back until Sunday evening. I was in the backyard raking leaves when I heard someone calling my name. It was Dorothy from next door. She was standing at the fence that separated our properties, her weathered hands gripping the wooden posts. She was 70 years old with silver hair. She always kept pinned back in a bun, and kind eyes that had seen a lot of life. Dorothy had been my neighbor for the entire 5 years I had lived in that house. She had watched Dylan grow from a sad, withdrawn 4-year-old into a happier, more confident child. She brought us vegetables from her garden and checked on us when she had not seen us for a few days. She was the kind of neighbor people do not seem to have anymore. "Henrietta," she called out, "do you have a moment? I need to talk to you about something." Something in her voice made me put down my rake and walk over to the fence. She looked worried, in a way I had never seen before. "Of course," I said. "Do you want to come inside?" We sat in my kitchen with cups of coffee that neither of us touched. Dorothy kept fidgeting with her hands clasping and unclasping them on the table. Finally, she took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eyes. "I do not know how to say this," she began. "And I have been debating whether I should say anything at all. But I would never forgive myself if something happened." And I had stayed quiet. My heart started beating faster. "What is it, Dorothy?" She paused, gathering her thoughts. "My bedroom window faces Dylan's room. You know that, right? I can see his window from my bed." I nodded, not sure where this was going. "At night, when everything is quiet, I hear your son crying." I blinked, confused. "Crying? Dylan sleeps through the night. He has for years." Dorothy shook her head slowly. "That is what I thought too at first. I thought maybe I was hearing things. I'm an old woman after all. My ears are not what they used to be." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "But it happens almost every night, Henrietta. Around 2 or 3 in the morning. I wake up and I hear him through the window. Not just crying, screaming. My blood ran cold. Screaming. He screams, 'Stop,' she said, her voice barely above a whisper, over and over. 'Stop, please stop.' And then it goes quiet, like someone is silencing him. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. That is impossible. I sleep in the room right down the hall. I would hear if he was screaming." Dorothy reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was papery and cool. "I know what I hear, dear. I have been hearing it for months now. At first I thought it was nightmares. Children have nightmares. But this is different. This is too regular, too deliberate. Months." My voice came out strangled. "Why did you not tell me sooner?" She looked down at her hands. "I was not sure it was my place. I thought maybe you knew and were handling it. But then I started thinking about what those screams might mean, and I could not stay silent anymore." After Dorothy left, I sat alone in my kitchen for a long time. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what she had told me. Dylan crying in the night, screaming "stop" for months, and then the pieces started coming together in my head. Dylan's exhaustion, his declining grades, the way he avoided Craig now, the key that mysteriously appeared on the kitchen counter, the tea that made him sleep so deeply, Craig being awake in the middle of the night. No, that could not be right. Craig loved Dylan. He had been nothing but good to my son. There had to be another explanation, but the doubt had been planted, and it grew roots faster than I could pull them out. That night, I did not drink the tea Craig usually made for me before bed. I pretended to sip it, and then poured it down the bathroom sink when he was not looking. I got into bed at the usual time and closed my eyes, pretending to fall asleep. Craig lay beside me reading a book for a while before turning off his lamp. I heard his breathing slow and deepen. An hour passed, then 2. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I focused on keeping my breathing even and steady. In and out, in and out. At 2:15 in the morning, Craig stirred. The mattress shifted as he carefully got out of bed. I kept my eyes closed, not moving a muscle. I heard his footsteps, soft and deliberate, crossing the bedroom floor. The door opened with the faintest creak. Then it closed again. I waited a full minute before I opened my eyes. I got out of bed as quietly as I could, my bare feet silent on the carpet. My whole body was trembling as I crept toward the bedroom door. Part of me was screaming that this was crazy, that I was about to spy on my husband for no good reason. But a larger part, the mother part, needed to know. I eased the door open and stepped into the hallway. It was dark except for a sliver of light coming from under Dylan's door. Dylan's door, which should have been closed tight with a sleeping child inside. I moved toward the light, each step feeling like it took an eternity. As I got closer, I could hear something. A voice, low and measured, speaking in tones that sent ice through my veins. I pressed myself against the wall next to Dylan's door frame. The door was open just a crack enough for me to see inside without being seen. What I saw destroyed everything I thought I knew about the man I had married. Craig was sitting on the edge of Dylan's bed. My son was lying there, his eyes open but glassy like he was not fully awake. His body seemed heavy, unresponsive. The tea was keeping him sedated enough that he could not move properly, but aware enough to hear and feel everything. Craig was leaning close to Dylan's face, speaking in that same low, measured voice. "You know what happens if you tell anyone, right?" Dylan's lips moved slightly. He was trying to speak, but the words would not come out right. His eyes were wet with tears that rolled silently down his temples into his hair. "Your mom chose me," Craig continued. "She loves me more than anything, more than she loves you. If you say anything, she will not believe you. She will think you are lying." A whimper escaped Dylan's throat. "And even if she does believe you," Craig's voice dropped even lower, "I will make sure you never see her again. I know people who can make children disappear. Is that what you want?" Dylan managed to shake his head weakly. "Good boy." Craig patted Dylan's cheek in a gesture that made my stomach turn. "This is our little secret. These visits are between us. And if you ever try to tell her, if you ever wake up and run to mommy, I will hurt her. Do you understand me? I will hurt her badly." Dylan nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Sweet dreams, Dylan." Craig stood up and straightened his pajamas. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, terrified he would see me. But he turned and walked out of Dylan's room, heading toward the bathroom instead of back to the bedroom. I seized my chance. I slipped back down the hallway and into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin just as I heard the bathroom door close. Seconds later, Craig returned to bed, lying down beside me like nothing had happened. I lay there in the darkness, every muscle in my body rigid with horror and rage. The man I had married, the man I had trusted with my son, had been terrorizing Dylan for months, sneaking into his room in the middle of the night, drugging him so he could not fight back or call for help, threatening him with violence against me if he ever told. And I had been sleeping through all of it, blissfully unaware, probably drugged myself by those nightly cups of tea. Tears slid down my face and soaked into my pillow. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Craig by the throat and throw him out of my house. But I knew I could not do that. Not yet. Craig was dangerous. I had just heard him threaten to make my child disappear. I had no idea what he was truly capable of. If I confronted him now in the middle of the night with no witnesses and no proof, things could go very badly. I needed to be smart about this. I needed evidence. I needed help. So I lay there silent and still as my husband fell asleep beside me. And I made a plan. The next morning was the hardest acting I have ever done in my life. Craig woke up and stretched and smiled at me like he always did. He kissed my forehead and asked if I slept well. I said yes. He went downstairs to make coffee, humming to himself, and I wanted to vomit. Dylan came down for breakfast, looking exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. He barely touched his food. Craig ruffled his hair and said something about growing boys needing their rest. Dylan flinched at the touch just slightly, but I saw it. Now that I knew what to look for, I saw everything. Craig left for work at his usual time, kissing me goodbye at the door. The second his car disappeared around the corner, I sprang into action. First, I went to Dylan's room and searched for the tea. In his nightstand drawer, I found a small bottle with no label. I took it and drove straight to the pharmacy on Main Street. I asked the pharmacist if he could tell me what was inside. He looked at me strangely but agreed to test it. An hour later, he called me with the results. It was a mild sedative, the kind you could buy over the counter at certain stores. Not strong enough to be dangerous in small doses, but enough to make someone drowsy and compliant. Enough to keep a child from waking up fully or calling for help. I felt sick. I had been giving my son that tea myself on nights when Craig was too busy to make it. I had helped drug my own child without knowing it. Back at home, I searched through Craig's things while Dylan was at school. In a shoebox in the back of his closet, I found another bottle of the same sedative. I also found something else that made my hands shake. A small notebook with dates and times written inside. Every entry corresponded to a night when Craig had supposedly been unable to sleep. Every entry was a record of his visits to Dylan's room. He had been keeping track, like it was some kind of sick project. I photographed everything with my phone. Then I drove to a hardware store 2 towns over, where no one would recognize me, and bought a small camera designed to look like an alarm clock. That afternoon, I installed it in Dylan's room, angled to capture the bed and the doorway. If Craig came into that room again, I would have proof. That evening, I picked Dylan up from school early. I told his teacher he had a doctor's appointment. Instead, I drove to a park on the other side of town, far from anyone who might overhear us. We sat on a bench together, and I took my son's hands in mine. "Dylan," I said gently, "I need to ask you something very important, and I need you to tell me the truth no matter how scary it might be." He looked up at me with those tired, frightened eyes that had seen too much for a 9-year-old boy. "I know about Craig," I said. "I know what he does at night." The change in Dylan was immediate and devastating. His face crumpled. His whole body started shaking. And then he was sobbing in my arms, clutching at my jacket like he was drowning. And I was the only thing keeping him afloat. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he wailed. "I wanted to tell you. I wanted to tell you so bad, but he said he would hurt you. He said he would make me disappear, and I would never see you again." "Shh, baby. Shh. I am here now. He cannot hurt us anymore." I held my son while he cried out months of terror and loneliness. He told me everything. How it started around the 2nd month after the wedding. How Craig would come into his room at night just to watch him sleep at first. How it gradually escalated to whispered threats and promises of violence. How Dylan had tried to lock his door only to have Craig take the key away. How he had learned to pretend to be asleep, to try not to react because any sign of consciousness made Craig stay longer. He told me he was so tired of being scared, tired of pretending everything was fine at school, tired of drinking that tea that made his head fuzzy and his body heavy, tired of lying to me. "Why did you not tell me?" I asked, my own tears mixing with his. "I would have believed you. I would have protected you." Dylan looked at me with an expression that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. "He said you loved him more than me?" Dylan whispered. "He said you would pick him over me because grown-ups always believe each other. He said no one believes kids." I pulled my son close and held him tighter than I had ever held anything in my life. "I will always believe you," I said. "Always. You are my whole world, Dylan. Nothing and no one will ever change that." That afternoon, I drove straight to the police station. I brought Dylan and I brought all the evidence I had gathered. The sedative bottles, the photographs of Craig's notebook, the pharmacist's report. A detective named Patricia Reeves handled our case. She was a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened to Dylan's statement with a child advocate present, never interrupting, never making him feel like he was not believed. "This is psychological abuse," Detective Reeves told me afterward. "The threats, the intimidation, the deliberate isolation from support, and administering sedatives to a minor without parental knowledge or consent is a serious crime." She helped me file for an emergency protective order. She sent officers to Craig's workplace to arrest him that same afternoon. I was not there when they put the handcuffs on him, but I heard later that he denied everything. He said Dylan was a troubled child who told lies for attention. He said I was an unstable ex-wife trying to ruin his life. But then Detective Reeves showed him the video. The camera I had hidden in Dylan's room had captured everything from the previous night. Craig entering the room at 2:23 in the morning, sitting on the bed, leaning over my sedated son, speaking those terrible words that I had heard from the hallway. Craig's lawyer tried to argue that the recording was obtained illegally. The judge disagreed. Craig was charged with child abuse, making criminal threats, and administering intoxicating substances to a minor. The trial took 4 months. 4 months of testimonies and evidence, and having our private trauma dissected in a public courtroom. Dorothy took the stand and described what she had heard through her window. The pharmacist testified about the sedative. Detective Reeves walked the jury through the evidence. And Dylan, my brave, brave boy. Dylan testified against his stepfather in front of a room full of strangers. He told them everything, his voice steady, even when his hands were shaking. He looked Craig in the eye and told the truth that had been forced into silence for so long. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Craig was sentenced to 3 years in prison, plus a lifetime ban from any contact with Dylan. His name was added to a registry that would follow him forever. He would never work with children, never be trusted with the vulnerable, never have the chance to do this to anyone else. As they led him away in handcuffs, Craig turned and looked at me. His eyes were full of rage and hate. I looked right back at him, without flinching. I had spent months being afraid without even knowing it. I was done being afraid. The months after Craig's arrest were some of the hardest of my life. Removing him from our home was only the first step. The real work was healing the damage he had left behind. Dylan and I moved in with my mother for a while. The house where we had lived with Craig held too many terrible memories. Every room reminded us of the man who had violated our trust and terrorized my child. We needed a fresh start, and we could not find that within those walls. My son had nightmares almost every night in the beginning. He would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, calling for me. I slept in his room on a cot for weeks, wanting to be there the moment he opened his eyes. "It is okay, baby," I would whisper in the darkness. "He is gone. He cannot hurt you anymore. I'm right here." Some nights it took hours to calm him down. Some nights he could not go back to sleep at all, and we would sit in the kitchen eating cereal and watching cartoons until the sun came up. I was exhausted all the time, but I did not care. My son needed me, and I was determined to be there for every single moment. I found a child psychologist named Dr. Eleanor Hammond, who specialized in trauma. She was a soft-spoken woman in her 60s with gray hair and gentle hands. Dylan did not want to talk at first. He had spent so long keeping secrets that opening up felt dangerous to him. But Dr. Hammond was patient. She used play therapy, art therapy, anything to help Dylan express what he was feeling, without forcing him to verbalize it before he was ready. Slowly, over many sessions, he began to let down his walls. She helped him understand that nothing that happened was his fault, that Craig was a very skilled manipulator who had targeted our family deliberately, that keeping quiet to protect me did not make Dylan complicit in his own abuse. "You were being a good son," Dr. Hammond told him once. "You thought you were keeping your mother safe. That is not weakness, that is love." I saw Dylan's shoulders relax. When she said that, like a weight he had been carrying for months had finally lifted. I went to therapy too. I needed to process my own guilt and grief. I had brought Craig into our lives. I had ignored the warning signs. I had been so desperate for love and stability that I had endangered the person I loved most in the world. My therapist helped me see things differently. She reminded me that predators like Craig are experts at deception. They study their targets, learn what they want to hear, and become exactly that. I was not stupid or naive. I was deliberately manipulated by someone who had probably done it before. "It was not your fault," she told me. "But I know you need time to believe that." She was right. It took a long time for the guilt to fade. Some days I still feel echoes of it even now. About 6 months after the trial ended, I made the decision to sell our house. I could not bear to go back there, and Dylan did not want to either. We bought a small apartment on the other side of town, near Dylan's new school. A fresh start in every way. Dorothy came to visit us often. She felt guilty for not speaking up sooner, but I assured her that she had nothing to apologize for. She spoke up when it mattered most. Her words were the key that unlocked everything. Without her, I might never have known what was happening to my son. You saved him, I told her. You saved both of us. She waved off my thanks with typical humility. I just told you what I heard. You did everything else. Dylan started at his new school the following fall. It was hard at first. He was behind academically from all those months of exhaustion and distraction. He was shy around the other kids, afraid to make friends, afraid to let anyone get close. But children are resilient in ways that still amaze me. By the end of that first year, Dylan had made 2 close friends. He joined the soccer team and discovered he had a natural talent for it. He started smiling again, laughing again, being the boy he was meant to be before Craig stole his childhood innocence. One evening, about a year and a half after we moved into our new apartment, Dylan came to me while I was making dinner. "Mom," he said, "I'm not scared anymore." I turned off the stove and gave him my full attention. Those 5 words meant more than he could possibly know. "He is never coming back, right?" Dylan asked. "Never," I promised him. "And even if he tried, I would not let him anywhere near you." Dylan nodded slowly. Then he said something that made me cry. "You saved me, Mom. You listened when I could not speak. You believed me when he said no one would." I knelt down and wrapped my arms around my son. "You saved yourself too, baby," I whispered. "You were so brave. You survived all those months on your own, and when someone finally asked, you told the truth. That takes more courage than most adults have." We held each other for a long time in that kitchen. 2 survivors of the same storm, finally finding our way back to shore. I'm 53 years old now. That night, when Dorothy knocked on my door, feels like another lifetime, even though I remember every detail like it was yesterday. Dylan is 24 years old. He graduated from college last spring with a degree in social work. He now works for a non-profit organization that helps children who have experienced abuse. Every day, he uses what happened to him to help other kids find their voices, to let them know that they are not alone, that someone will believe them. I'm so proud of the man he has become that sometimes it brings me to tears. He took the worst thing that ever happened to him and transformed it into a purpose. He turned his pain into power. We talk about Craig sometimes, Dylan and I. Not often, but when it comes up naturally. Dylan has processed a lot through therapy over the years. He does not carry the same fear and anger he once did. He has found peace with his past as much as anyone can. Craig served his 3 years and was released. I do not know where he is now, and I do not want to know. The restraining order is still in effect. He knows better than to contact us. And even if he tried, Dylan is not a scared little boy anymore. He is a strong, capable man who knows his worth. I never remarried, not because I am afraid of love or because I believe all men are dangerous. I just found that my life felt complete with Dylan, with my work, with the friendships I have built over the years. I date occasionally, but I have not found anyone I want to share my life with permanently. And that is okay. I have learned that happiness does not require a partner. It comes from within. Dorothy passed away 3 years ago. She was 82 years old and died peacefully in her sleep. Dylan and I were at her bedside in those final days, holding her hands, thanking her for everything she did for us. She never thought of herself as a hero. She was just a good neighbor who cared enough to speak up when something seemed wrong. But to us, she was everything. She was the voice that broke through my ignorance and saved my son. I share my story now because I want other parents to learn from my mistakes. I want them to know the signs I missed and take them seriously if they see them in their own children. If your child suddenly becomes withdrawn, pay attention. If they avoid a certain adult they used to be comfortable with, ask why. If they are tired all the time, struggling in school, reluctant to go to sleep, do not assume it is just a phase. Children often cannot articulate what is happening to them, especially when they have been threatened into silence. But their behavior speaks volumes if we know how to listen. And if something feels wrong, trust that feeling. I wish I had trusted mine sooner. I wish I had not been so desperate to believe that everything was fine. My son suffered for months because I did not want to see what was right in front of me. I have also learned the importance of community. Dorothy saved my son because she paid attention to what was happening in the house next door. She did not dismiss the sounds she heard or convince herself it was not her business. She came to me even though it was awkward, even though she was afraid of being wrong. We need more people like Dorothy in this world. People who care enough to get involved. People who understand that protecting children is everyone's responsibility. It takes a village to raise a child. It also takes a village to protect one. For years, I carried guilt and anger about what happened. I was furious at Craig for what he did, furious at myself for letting him into our lives, furious at a world that could produce someone so skilled at deception and manipulation. But I've learned that carrying that anger only hurts me. It takes up space in my heart that could be filled with better things. It keeps me chained to the past when I should be living in the present. I do not forgive Craig. I never will. What he did to my son was monstrous and unforgivable. But I have released the rage that once consumed me. I have let go of the constant replaying of what if and if only. I have made peace with the fact that I cannot change the past, only shape the future. That freedom did not come easily. It took years of therapy, years of hard work, years of choosing every single day to focus on healing instead of hatred. But it was worth it. On the other side of that struggle, I found peace. If there is a child in your life who has grown quiet, who flinches at certain names, who cannot sleep through the night, please pay attention. Do not dismiss their silence as shyness or their fear as drama. Ask questions. Dig deeper. Let them know that no matter what anyone has told them, they can trust you with the truth. And if you see something concerning in a home that is not yours, speak up. You might feel like you are overstepping. You might worry about being wrong. But that moment of discomfort is nothing compared to the suffering that could continue if you stay silent. My neighbor heard my son screaming at night. She did not ignore it. She did not tell herself it was not her problem. She walked across her yard and knocked on my door and changed our lives forever. That morning when Dorothy came to my door, I had a choice. I could have dismissed her concerns, defended my husband, protected the illusion I had built. But something in her eyes told me she was not wrong. Something in my gut told me to listen. I will never stop being grateful that I did. My son screamed every night for months, and I never heard. Not because I was not there, but because I did not want to see what was in front of me. I built walls around my happiness, and those walls became a prison for the person I loved most. Please learn from my story. Please watch the children in your life with open eyes and an open heart. Please speak up when something does not feel right, even if you are afraid of being wrong. Because somewhere out there, right now, there is a child crying out in the darkness, waiting for someone to hear them. I hope my story reaches them before it is too late. Now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever noticed a change in a child around you that you could not quite explain? Have you ever had a gut feeling that something was wrong, even when everything looked fine on the surface? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please take a moment to hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories and might just help another family recognize the signs before it is too late. Please subscribe to this channel if you have not already, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose life you might change. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching and for listening to my story. May you always have the courage to trust your instincts, the wisdom to listen to the children in your life, and the strength to speak up when something is not right. Take care of yourselves and each other. I will see you in the next story.